Okay, what's the problem?
Apparently everybody's been shot up here. Everybody's laying down in a pool of blood. His mama's been shot, the mechanic's been shot, and the owner.
Hello and welcome back. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss any future video. Today, we're unraveling the tragic story of a quadruple homicide that stunned the quiet town of Chesnee, South Carolina in 2003. This is the case of Superbike Motorsports, where 4 innocent people were gunned down in cold blood, and it took 13 years for the truth to finally come out. So let's dive in. Scott Dean Ponder was one of Chesnee's most well-known residents. Born on February 7, 1973, Scott had always been passionate about motorcycles. His love for bikes and racing was nurtured by his mother, Beverly Guy, and his stepfather, Terry Guy. Scott eventually earned a racer's license and participated in prestigious racing events, including Daytona Motor Speedway in Florida. This was a huge accomplishment for someone from a small town. His sharp instincts and exceptional skills turned him into a local hero in Chesnee, admired by many and known for his magnetic personality. Scott wasn't just skilled, he was social, a man who thrived in the company of others, and his presence was cherished by all who knew him. Scott's success in racing only grew, and so did his desire to share his love of motorcycles with others. In the late 1990s, what began as a humble backyard operation quickly expanded into something much bigger. By 2001, Scott opened Superbike Motorsports, a motorcycle dealership and repair shop that quickly became a local favorite. It was a place where bike enthusiasts could come together, share stories, and get their bikes serviced by experts. Business boomed, and Scott's close friend Brian Lucas joined him as a co-partner. Brian Lucas, like Scott, had a deep love for bikes. They shared not just a business partnership, but a genuine friendship, which made Superbike Motorsports more than just a business. It was a passion project for both men. Brian was known for his dedication to customer service, ensuring that every client left satisfied. Together, Scott and Brian built a thriving business, even securing a dealership with Suzuki, which was no small feat for an independent shop. Their hard work paid off as they quickly became one of the top motorcycle dealerships in the region. Working alongside Scott and Brian were Scott's mother, Beverly, and their trusted mechanic, Chris Sherbert. Beverly helped with the business's financial operations, while Chris, known for his expertise, was the go-to guy when it came to bike repairs. This was a team built on trust, hard work, and camaraderie. But Scott's life was about more than just business. In 2001, he met Melissa Brackman at an industry event. Melissa, a former homecoming queen, was captivated by Scott's charm and kindness. Their love blossomed, and they were soon married. Life seemed perfect. Superbike Motorsports was thriving. Scott and Melissa were about to start a family. In October of 2003, Melissa discovered that she was pregnant with a baby boy, a moment that filled both of them with joy and excitement for the future. November 6, 2003 was a typical sunny day in Chesnee, with nothing out of the ordinary to indicate the tragedy that would soon unfold. Scott Ponder, Brian Lucas, Chris Sherbert, and Beverly Guy all went about their work at Superbike Motorsports, attending to the customers and their tasks like any other day.
Obviously, you have vivid memories of that particular day. Do you remember where you were?
I do. That day I had talked to him at, I don't know, maybe 2:15, somewhere around there. He called me and it was a normal, well, I'll see you later. I love you, bye. That was the last time I talked to him.
Scott began their day at the shop as usual, tending to the customers who wandered in. Among them was Kelly Sisk, accompanied by his 4-year-old son, shopping for a go-kart. After making his purchase, Kelly lingered in the store, enjoying the atmosphere. Brian, who was supposed to be off that day to prepare for a family vacation, had been called in by Scott to handle a customer complaint. Without hesitation, Brian came in and immediately got to work on the bike. Meanwhile, Scott's mother, Beverly, joined him at the counter, lending a hand with the customers. She just took Scott's grandmother to a chemotherapy session. Around 2:30 p.m., Scott's friend Noah Lee called the shop. Beverly answered, and after a brief exchange, agreed that Noah could stop by. It would only take him about 7 minutes to get there. After hanging up, Beverly decided to use the bathroom, leaving the shop for just a moment. At 3 p.m., Noah arrived at the shop, only to be met with a chilling scene. At first, he thought Scott and Brian were playing a prank. They were lying motionless on the ground at the front of the store, and Noah, not understanding the gravity of the situation, gave one of them a light kick, jokingly telling them to stop fooling around. But when he saw the blood, he realized the horrifying truth. His friends were not playing. They were dead, along with Beverly and Chris. Panicked, Noah immediately called 911. His voice shaking as he described the scene. He said, "Apparently, everybody's been shot up here. Everybody's laying down in a pool of blood. His mama's been shot, the mechanic's been shot, and the owner." When police arrived, they were met with a crime scene that would haunt them for years. Chris Sherbert, the mechanic, was found slumped over a bike in the back of the shop, as if he was working on it just moments before the attack. Beverly's body was discovered near the bathroom. Perhaps she was ambushed as she came out. Scott and Brian were both found near the front of the store, lying in pools of blood. The positioning of their bodies suggested they had tried to flee, but were shot down before they could escape. The crime was brutal. Each victim had been shot multiple times, execution style. The killer had entered the shop with a cold, calculated intent to murder, shooting each victim in the chest and head at point-blank range, leaving no chance of survival. The news of the murders spread quickly through Chesnee, leaving the town in a state of shock and disbelief. A quadruple homicide in broad daylight was unheard of in such a small, tight-knit community. Who would commit such a heinous act and why? The police launched an immediate investigation, combing through the crime scene for evidence. Blood samples were taken, and forensic experts worked tirelessly to piece together what had happened. However, early on, the case presented more questions than answers. Witnesses in the area reported seeing a suspicious couple near the shop on the day of the murders. Based on these accounts, police released sketches of the two potential suspects and disseminated them across South Carolina. The detectives theorized that the man was the shooter, who had likely taken Chris and Beverly by surprise in the back of the shop, while the woman distracted Scott and Brian at the front. Once the man finished his grim task in the back, he moved to the front, where he coldly executed Scott and Brian. However, this was purely speculative, with no solid evidence to back it up. As the weeks turned into months, the case grew colder. Extensive media coverage only heightened pressure on the detectives, forcing them to re-examine every detail with fresh eyes. It was during this renewed scrutiny that a critical breakthrough emerged. Scott, Beverly, and Brian were found to have clean histories, their lives seemingly untainted by anything that could explain the brutal crime. But when they delved into Chris Sherbert's past, a darker story began to unfold. There were rumors of a drug connection tied to Chris's previous job, suggesting that he might have been involved with some dangerous individuals. Adding to the intrigue, Chris was scheduled to appear in court the Monday following the murders. This revelation hinted at a possible motive, suggesting that Chris's connections might have been more sinister than anyone had realized, and perhaps someone wanted to silence him before he could testify in court. In 2003, drug smuggling and abuse were on the rise, with law enforcement desperately trying to dismantle the criminal networks fueling this epidemic, particularly among vulnerable teens. As the investigation into the quadruple homicide at Superbike Motorsports unfolded, a disturbing theory began to take shape. Could the real target of the attack have been Chris Sherbert, with the other 3 victims tragically caught in the crossfire? Because after all, Chris was the first to be shot. However, despite the plausibility of this theory, no concrete evidence emerged to support, leaving the investigation at a frustrating standstill. For Scott's wife, Melissa, the months following the murders were unbearable. Not only had she lost her husband, but she was 6 months pregnant, preparing to give birth to their child without him by her side. In June 2004, she gave birth to Scott Ponder Jr., a bittersweet moment of joy amidst overwhelming grief. A year passed with little progress. The detectives decided to approach the case from an entirely new angle. They uncovered a curious detail about Brian. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Brian had been quietly searching for a new house. What struck investigators as particularly odd was that his wife, Robin, seemed completely unaware of his plans. It turned out that Brian and Robin's marriage was so troubled and strained that Brian was considering moving out and living alone. The police decided to call on Melissa for questioning. During one of these visits, while at the station, Melissa changed her son's diaper, and the police discreetly collected a DNA sample from the discarded diaper. What the DNA test revealed stunned everyone involved. The results showed that Scott Jr. was not Scott's biological son. Brian was the father. The detectives began to explore possibility of a love triangle involving Scott, Melissa, and Brian. Rumors of infidelity quickly spread throughout the community. Even Brian's mother confirmed that her son was considering a divorce and having an affair. Melissa found herself relentlessly dragged back to the police station time and time again, grilled about a rumored affair. Each time, she stood firm in her claim that Scott Jr. was undeniably Scott Ponder's son. For the next 18 agonizing months, detectives kept Melissa under constant surveillance, watching her every move, waiting for a crack in her resolve. But then, in a twist no one saw coming, the investigation took a dramatic turn due to a shocking mistake. A DNA test on blood samples taken from Beverly and Brian surprisingly showed that Brian was Beverly's son. It was at this moment that the detectives realized there had been a serious mistake. DNA samples from the crime scene were mishandled and labeled incorrectly. Scott's DNA had been confused with Brian's. This crucial discovery cleared Melissa of suspicion, proving there was no love triangle, and finally ended the rumors that had clouded the investigation. Detectives immediately shifted their focus, drawing connections to another homicide that had occurred just 30 miles away. On May 16, 2003, the quiet town of Greer, South Carolina, was rocked by a triple homicide at the Blue Ridge Savings Bank. Much like the tragic events at Superbike Motorsports, this shooting unfolded in broad daylight, with no witnesses to provide any clues. When police reviewed the CCTV footage, they discovered a potential lead: a red car seen approaching the bank at precisely 1:24 p.m. Just 3 minutes after the horrifying incident, the same vehicle was captured on camera driving away from the scene. This crime was swift and meticulously calculated.
3 minutes after the incident,
there was a red car that was seen driving to the bank on the frontage road at about 1:24 p.m. The Barnes family was seen driving 3 minutes later.
Coincidentally, a similar red car was spotted near the scene of Superbike Motorsports case. The detectives tracked down the vehicle and found out the car had been stolen by 39-year-old Emerson Wright from a rental lot just days before the murders. Police concluded that Wright, desperate and dangerous, entered the bank with the intent to rob it, but panicked and shot everyone to death. Unfortunately, detectives never had the chance to question Wright about the bank robbery or the Superbike Motorsports murders. 2 years later, Wright was involved in a dramatic car chase with the Georgia State Police. Wright crashed his car and took his own life with a single gunshot to the head. Despite the striking similarities between the two cases, investigators ultimately concluded that they were not connected. With no new leads or theories to pursue, the Superbike Motorsports homicide joined the long list of cold cases in South Carolina, and for 13 years, there was no progress. In 2016, the cold case finally broke open, and it did so in the most unexpected way. On August 31, 2016, Kala Brown and her boyfriend, Charlie David Carver, went missing after visiting a property owned by Todd Kohlhepp, a local real estate agent. For weeks, there was no sign of them, until police tracked Kala's cell phone signal, leading them to a chilling discovery. Kala was found chained inside a shipping container, held captive by Kohlhepp for nearly 2 months. Kala was still shocked when asked about her nightmare abduction.
The first 2 weeks I was there in the building, my ankles were cuffed, my hands were cuffed behind my back, and I had a chain around my neck. It's really moved the first week or so I was there.
What did Todd do while you were there?
We would get there between 1 and 3 o'clock every day, take me up to the main building, beat me, make me do whatever he wanted sexually, and then he'd put me back in the building.
Kohlhepp threatened to kill Kala if she became useless. He even bragged about the number of victims like his trophy.
Did he ever tell you how many people he's killed out there?
Story-wise, he's told me about 4. He also told me that he walked into, a few years back, that he walked into a bike shop in Anderson and shot 4 people and left, and they never found out who did it. He liked to brag that he was a serial killer and a mass murderer. He said he was going to kill more people because he had dreams of his body count being in 3 digits. He said right now it was still high 2 digits. He said if I was a good girl, he'd teach me how to kill and I could be his partner. He said he used to kill people for the government. He said he was a paramilitary contractor and that when he got home, he just couldn't keep from seeing the bad in everybody. He said he liked killing drug dealers and stuff, but that for some reason he just wanted me and that Charlie was just had to go so he didn't know I was serious.
Kohlhepp even claimed he used to be a hitman for the government and a paramilitary contractor. He dreamt of killing at least 100 people and going into history as the best serial killer. Tragically, Kala's boyfriend, Charlie, had been murdered. After meticulously searching Kohlhepp's property and avoiding hidden bear traps, police found Charlie's body riddled with gunshot wounds. On November 5, 2016, Todd Kohlhepp was arrested for kidnapping and murder. He proudly confessed to multiple killings, including the quadruple homicide at Superbike Motorsports. Kohlhepp recalled purchasing a Suzuki GSX R750 from Superbike Motorsports, but soon realized he couldn't ride it due to inexperience. Frustrated, he returned to the shop, demanded something more suitable for a beginner, but instead of help, Scott Ponder and Brian Lucas ridiculed him for cannot handle the powerful machine. Kohlhepp began harboring a deep resentment toward the men. But that wasn't the end of his troubles. Just weeks after purchasing the bike, it was stolen right in front of his apartment complex. When Kohlhepp reported the theft to the police, he felt that no one took him seriously. Despite losing his $1,000 insurance deposit, neither the police nor the shop offered any assistance. His frustration mounted, and the taunting he claimed to have endured at Superbike Motorsports festered into something far more dangerous. A murderous rage that would eventually lead to one of the most horrific crimes in Chesney's history. According to Kohlhepp, on November 6, 2003, he returned to the shop armed with a Beretta 92 FS handgun, intending to exact his revenge. He waited until the store was mostly empty, ensuring that only Scott and Brian were inside. Once he was confident that the coast was clear, Kohlhepp unleashed his fury, shooting each person in cold blood. In his chilling confession, Kohlhepp described how he shot Beverly as she came out of the bathroom, Chris while he was working on a bike in the back, and then Scott and Brian as they tried to escape.
You said, you mentioned in here exactly where you shot her, and then you said you shot, and where you shot the mechanic, when you shot him. The other 2 gentlemen, as they were running, you mentioned you shot one of them in the back. Do you know, as the other one was running, where you shot him, where he was hit?
No, sir.
Okay.
Moving targets, multiple moving targets. I don't think I missed. If I did, it wasn't more than once.
Okay.
But I mean, it's not an easy shot when you got 2 moving targets running fast as they can.
Kohlhepp's recounting of the murders was disturbingly casual, as though he was merely describing an ordinary event. He claimed that he didn't regret his actions because, in his mind, the men had disrespected him and deserved to die. Beverly and Chris, he admitted, were simply collateral damage, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The news of Kohlhepp's confession sent shockwaves through the town of Chesney and beyond. For the families of the victims, there was a sense of relief that justice had finally been served after 13 long years. Scott's widow, Melissa, expressed mixed emotions following the confession. While she was grateful that the case was finally solved, she couldn't believe Kohlhepp's story. Scott, a kind and charismatic man, would never ridicule anyone to the point of provoking such violence.
I can see Scott and I can see Brian laughing and joking, but not one time could I ever picture them belittling someone or making them feel less than what they were. And that right there tells me that he, Todd, couldn't have been in his right mind.
Melissa's doubts were echoed by many in the community who found it hard to believe that a minor altercation over a motorcycle could have sparked such a monstrous act. Kohlhepp's calm and detached demeanor during his confession made many question whether his explanation was the full truth. To fully understand Todd Kohlhepp and what drove him to commit these horrific acts, investigators looked deeper into his past. What they uncovered was a troubling history of violence that had followed Kohlhepp from a young age. Born on March 7, 1971, Todd Kohlhepp's early life was marked by dysfunction. His parents divorced when he was just 2 years old, and although he lived with his mother and her new boyfriend, Kohlhepp yearned to be with his biological father. But even as a child, Kohlhepp's behavior was deeply troubling. He was described as a troubled and angry child, prone to violent outbursts and cruelty toward animals. In one particularly incident, he killed a goldfish by pouring bleach into its tank and shot a dog with a BB gun. Despite spending 3.5 months in a psychiatric hospital in Georgia, his aggression only grew more entrenched. At the age of 15, Kohlhepp committed his first serious crime. In 1986, he kidnapped a 14-year-old girl named Christy Granado at gunpoint in Tempe, Arizona. He brought her to his home, where he tied her up and sexually assaulted her before walking her back to her house and threatening to kill her family if she told anyone. Despite his threats, the girl reported the attack, and Kohlhepp was arrested and charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and committing a dangerous crime against children. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and required to register as a sex offender. After serving his sentence, Kohlhepp was released from prison in 2001. Despite his criminal record, he managed to rebuild his life, obtaining a degree in computer science and later starting a successful real estate business. For years, it seemed as though Kohlhepp had turned his life around. He kept a low profile and became a well-respected figure in the community. But beneath the surface, the same violent impulses that had led to his earlier crimes still simmered. Kohlhepp's confession in 2016 wasn't limited to the Superbike Motorsports murders. He admitted to killing at least 3 other people: Johnny Joe Coxey, Megan Lee McCraw Coxey, and Charlie Carver. Johnny and Megan had been lured to Kohlhepp's property under the pretense of work, only to be murdered and buried in shallow graves. Charlie, Calla Brown's boyfriend, was shot and killed shortly after the couple arrived at Kohlhepp's property in late 2016. The discovery of even more bodies on his property raised chilling questions about how many victims Kohlhepp may have had. Was there more to his story? Could there be other victims who had yet to be discovered? Kohlhepp's cool demeanor and willingness to confess suggested that he took pride in his killings, and many feared that his confession was only the tip of the iceberg. However, Kohlhepp's mother, blinded by her distorted love, portrayed him as a kind and ambitious young man. She claimed he attacked others just because they embarrassed him.
They embarrassed.
And so he killed them.
They embarrassed him. And you know, anybody, I don't care who you are, and whether you have a temper or you don't have a temper, nobody wants to be embarrassed. Which, I know that doesn't mean much to the families, and I'm sorry, but he wasn't a serial killer.
Despite the gravity of his crimes and the fact that he was a serial killer, Kohlhepp never faced a public trial. Instead, prosecutors, after consulting with the families of his victims and the sole survivor, opted for a plea deal. In exchange for his cooperation, Kohlhepp was offered life without the possibility of parole. 7 months after his arrest, he accepted the deal and was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he would never walk free again. The plea deal spared the families from the ordeal of a lengthy trial, bringing swift and certain justice to a man who had caused so much pain. For the families of his victims, the lack of a public trial left many feeling that true justice had not been fully served. They were denied the chance to see Kohlhepp publicly held accountable in a court of law, and many felt that the plea deal allowed him to avoid facing the full weight of his crimes. Scott Ponder's wife, Melissa, expressed a deep sense of relief after finally getting closure on her husband's tragic death. In an interview, Melissa said she was willing to forgive.
I'm actually ready to forgive him. I'm ready to look at him and be able to tell him those words. I feel like that may not do anything for him, but that's what I need.
On May 23, 2017, Todd Kohlhepp was handed additional sentences: 30 years for assault and another 30 years for kidnapping.
He waived all his appeals, waived all his post-conviction relief. He cannot file any of those.
Todd Kohlhepp is currently serving his sentence at Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. According to reports from the Greenville News, he has managed to avoid any behavioral infractions, but that hasn't stopped him from making his presence felt behind bars. Early in his incarceration, Kohlhepp was placed in protective custody for reasons that remain unclear. Inmates are often placed in protective custody either for their own safety or to protect the general prison population from potential danger. However, Kohlhepp made headlines when, alongside 30 other inmates, he filed a lawsuit claiming mistreatment of those in protective custody. The lawsuit alleged that prisoners in this status were denied basic rights, including access to proper medical care and opportunities to reduce their sentences. By 2018, Kohlhepp had been moved out of protective custody and integrated into the prison's general population. He reportedly now works as a ward keeper's assistant, a role that allows him to perform various tasks within the facility. The case of Todd Kohlhepp is a haunting reminder of the evil that can hide behind a seemingly ordinary facade. For over a decade, Kohlhepp lived a double life: respected businessman by day, ruthless killer by night. His confession to the Superbike Motorsports murders finally brought some closure to the families of Scott Ponder, Brian Lucas, Chris Sherbert, and Beverly Guy. After 13 long years of pain and suffering, the families and relatives of the victims gathered for a candlelight vigil, honoring the memories of their loved ones who had been cruelly taken by the hands of a serial killer. As we wrap up today's episode, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Kohlhepp's story about why he committed the murders, or do you think there's more to the story that we may never know? Could Scott, Brian, Chris, and Beverly have truly provoked such a monstrous act, or was Kohlhepp simply looking for an excuse to kill? Let us know in the comments below. If you found today's episode engaging, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And if there's a case you'd like us to cover, feel free to leave a suggestion in the comments. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode.